coming up.
Reports some time ago suggested that Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng could sue the Government of Canada. So my first question is, can you confirm that there are no legal proceedings that have been initiated?
PHAC had a fact-finding report that indicated that there had been multiple breaches by Dr. Cheng and Dr. Chu with respect to security, with respect to intellectual property, and that indeed they had been on an unauthorized basis collaborating with the PRC, including the People's Liberation Army. So how at Canada's highest security lab, a level 4 lab, would they have continued to have unfettered access with PHAC having that information?
I didn't ask you if they were approved. I asked you, do you think it's appropriate given what you now know?
We're trying to understand why it took 10 months for the lab to be secured. And so my question is, when did the Deputy Minister of Health first become aware of the issues in the Winnipeg lab? Was it in 2018 or 2019?
Paragraph 31 of the June 30th, 2020 CSIS assessment of Dr. Chu states that an individual identified as restricted visitor number 1 had access to the Winnipeg lab. This individual was an employee of the People's Liberation Army-controlled Beijing Institute of Biotechnology, whose mentor was a major general identified as Beijing's chief biological defense expert engaged in research relating to biodefense and bioterrorism. Did this individual have a secret security clearance?
The Government of Canada have an MOU with the PRC or the WIV, the Wuhan Institute, to help its development into a level 4 lab?
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
To look at our own roster here around the table. Wanted to welcome Ms. Idla in place of Ms. McPherson, Mr. Cooper for Ms. Landsman, Dr. Ellis for MP Seaback, Mr. Iacono for Member of Parliament Oliphant, and MP Villemure for MP Bergeron. So welcome to all of you. So from the Department of Health, we have Dr. Stephen Lucas, Deputy Minister by video conference, Nadine Huggins, Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Security Officer, Corporate Services Branch. From the Public Health Agency of Canada, Heather Jaffrey, President, Dr. Guillaume Poliquin, Vice President, National Microbiology Laboratory by video conference, Donald Shepard, Vice President, Infectious Diseases and Vaccination Programs Branch, again by video conference.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to appear before the committee today to discuss the documents tabled in Parliament on February 28th related to the termination of 2 scientists at the National Microbiology Laboratory in 2021. The processes and policies that are in place will continue to be evaluated and enhanced with the view to continuously protecting the confidence and trust of Canadians in our work. Thank you.
Reports some time ago suggested that Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng could sue the Government of Canada. So my first question is, can you confirm that there are no legal proceedings that have been initiated by either Drs. Chu or Cheng against the Government of Canada?
I'm in a position to confirm that they had filed a complaint with the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency with regard to the suspension of their clearances.
Okay, and that's the extent of any proceedings that they have initiated to your knowledge?
As far as I'm aware.
Okay, thank you. One of the things we're trying to understand at the committee is why it took 10 months for the lab to be secured, 10 months between the discovery of a patent improperly registered in the People's Republic of China and July 5th of 2019 when the 2 scientists were escorted out of the lab. And so my questions are framed in that light to try to understand why it took 10 months. So my first question is, when did the Minister of Health and her office first become aware of the national security breaches at the lab?
My understanding is that the Minister of Health was briefed at different junctures in the investigation to be informed of decisions that were being taken by the deputy head of the agency in line with the administrative investigations. For example, in in June 2019 on the results of the fact-finding investigation, in August 2020 on the suspension of the employees, and in January 2021 on their firing.
The minister's office or the minister made aware before June of 2019?
My understanding is that they were briefed periodically. I don't have specific dates.
Okay. Could you get back to the committee and let us know when the minister and her office were first made aware of this this issue at the lab?
Yes, we will look back at the records.
Thank you.
And,
when did the president of the agency, your predecessor, first become aware of these national security breaches at the lab?
my understanding is that the initial briefings led to some identification by the security branch of the health portfolio, and that the opening of the fact-finding investigation was subsequently authorized. I don't have the specific date that the president would have been briefed on this, but the security branch did launch with the president of the agency that fact-finding investigation in December 2018.
Okay. I mean, the reason I asked this, Madam Jeffrey, is that the role of the president, the responsibilities of the president, the authorities of the president are to grant security clearances and to oversee the classification of employees and the access of those employees to the lab. So I think if you could let us know at some, after, if you could let us know, let the clerk of the committee know when the president first became aware of these breaches, because it's material to that that person's responsibility to ensure that security clearances are appropriate at the lab. The president of PIAC exited her role as president of PIAC on February 27th, 2019. A new deputy head was not appointed until May 6th of that year. So there was a period of about 10 weeks in which there was no president of PIAC. So my first question is, was there an interim or acting president of PIAC during that period from the end of February to the beginning of May of 2019?
Yes, as is normal, an interim president would be appointed with delegation during that period.
And who was that? What was that role? Was it an ADM or was it a director general? Like what? Who was the acting president during that period?
The acting president during that period was the chief public health officer.
Chief public health officer. And did that person, the chief public health officer, did she have the delegated authority over security clearances for the lab?
The policy on delegation resides with the deputy head. However, the approval of individual clearances is delegated to the chief security officer of the agency.
Okay, and so that wasn't, the delegation to the chief security officer wasn't just for that interregnum period. It's generally delegated at all times.
Yes, given the volume and size of the agency, the sort of day-to-day decision-making on security clearances resides with the chief security officer.
Okay. And when did the chief security officer first become aware of the national security issues at the lab?
So my understanding is that in August of 2018, subsequent to a briefing that was given for general awareness by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, that the potential concerns regarding the vulnerability of lab employees to potential influence were flagged to the service, and fact-finding began, and that in September, potential issues began to be identified, and the chief security officer was involved in those discussions.
To ensure the record is correct, the scientists in question Were they agents of the Chinese state, or were they Canadian, in fact?
Scientists in question were Canadian citizens, longstanding employees of the lab, and respected in their field of scientific effort.
Thank you very much. Was the shipment of live Ebola and Henipa virus to the Wuhan Institute authorized?
Yes, the shipment to the Wuhan Institute was authorized as per the standard procedures of the lab. The procedures around its transit were in full compliance with the relevant act and with biosafety regulations.
Were there any unauthorized shipments of removal of pathogens from the lab?
Mr. Chair, we have a very rigorous procedure to audit and account for all of the pathogens and toxins at the lab, and we are 100% certain that there were no unauthorized removals of high consequence pathogens or toxins from the lab environment at any time.
Ms. Jeffrey, who did the two scientists, Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng, report to?
I'm going to turn to my colleague, Dr. Polican, to confirm.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Chu reported to Dr. Gary Coppinger within special pathogens. Dr. Cheng reported to Grant McClarty, though has different functions within the lab over his course of his employment.
Can you provide the titles of those two individuals?
Yes, Dr. Coppinger was Chief of Special Pathogens, and Dr. McClarty was the Director of the Scientific Technologies Core.
And are they both employed at the lab or with PHAC today?
Both individuals have taken up other opportunities over the course of the past several years.
Did the 10-week delay for the Prime Minister to appoint a new president of PHAC have an impact on securing the lab?
I can say that we move forward, Mr. Chair, as expediently as possible to with the investigations. Initially, we had circumstances, then allegations, but given the severity and impact of them, it was very important to have evidence. And as soon as evidence was secured, we moved forward.
I asked you a specific question respectfully. Did the gap, the 10-week period in which there was no one at the top of PHAC, have an impact on the ability to secure the lab, yes or no?
No.
Okay, thank you for that. Between the time that red flags were first raised about Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng in the fall of 2018 through to the time that they were marched out of the lab on July 5th of 2019, were any restrictions during that nearly 11-month window placed upon them in terms of their access to the lab?
I'm going to turn to my colleague. At the time, the circumstances were still under investigation, and I would say that until the Canadian Security Intelligence Service was able to provide evidence that pointed to their willing collaboration that was undeclared, and that would have been in June of 2020, there was not evidence of their affiliations with external actors.
Ms. Jeffrey, I find that respectfully, and I know you weren't in charge at the time, but I find that astounding because in March of 2019, PHAC had a fact-finding report that indicated that there had been multiple breaches by Dr. Cheng and Dr. Chu with respect to security, with respect to intellectual property, and that indeed they had been on an unauthorized basis collaborating with the PRC, including the People's Liberation Army. So how at Canada's highest security lab, a level 4 lab, would they have continued to have unfettered access with PHAC having that information?
Mr. Chair, what I can say is that the evidence of their involvement in the talent programs and the foreign associations and some of their travel were not presented to the Public Health Agency until June 30th, 2020.
The fact-finding report was presented to PHAC on March 23rd, 2019, and that report contained all of the things that I just mentioned.
It's very important, given the seriousness of allegations, that we have evidence to back up the allegations.
Ms. Jeffrey, it was a fact-finding report. What evidence was needed to say that perhaps it's not a good idea to have two scientists who are working with Beijing on an unauthorized basis, including the PLA, to have access to a level 4 lab? I think common sense would indicate that they should not have been there after that time.
The administrative investigation that was concluded in the spring of 2019 specifically said that that an administrative investigation needed to be launched in order to determine if the allegations that had been raised in the fact-finding were indeed founded. So they were still allegations at that point in time, and in July 2019, both employees, as a result of that, were placed on leave without pay.
Ms. Jeffrey, in your opening statement, you spoke about a supportive culture. Could you elaborate on that?
Collaboration in research is at the heart of scientific advancement, public health research in particular, and in particular into the consequences of these pathogens, as we saw, for example, in the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, in the SARS outbreak in Canada, and most recently with COVID-19, show that international collaboration is essential to advance quickly to keep pace with evolving and mutating viruses. It's important, while safeguarding the security of these pathogens and toxins, as well as of our science, to be able to collaborate in a secure environment. So it is very important that our personnel understand and work within policies that allow them to collaborate where necessarily, while respecting the need to protect their work from unauthorized use. And so it is, I think, in this type of context, and certainly as you've seen in the security awareness and in the recently launched research security policy writ large across the country, it's very, very important that our science personnel are able to collaborate, but at the same time are very aware of the need for review, approvals, permissions, and appropriate boundaries on that collaboration.
Does that supportive culture extend to Chinese Canadian scientists? Since the incident at Winnipeg Labs, the sensitive research guidelines, as you've mentioned, have been introduced, resulting in a list of research organizations that are believed to pose a high risk to national security. Most of the organizations named on the list are Chinese. This has hindered funding applications and career advancement for some Chinese Canadian scientists, based not necessarily on any association with organizations on the list, but based solely on their Chinese surnames. What assurances can you provide to these scientists?
It's for exactly this reason that the investigation processes that we conducted at the time were so thorough and relied on evidence rather than allegations. The processes that we have in place now to review research collaborations and affiliations are broad-based and not specific to particular individuals. All of our scientists must sign a code of conduct and are required to declare conflicts of interest and affiliations. In this case, we had scientists that sought to hide and had undeclared affiliations, and that was the reason why they were fired. Scientists who work in the full knowledge and with declared conflicts of interest and affiliations have nothing to fear from the processes that we have enhanced and put in place.
Mr. Lucas or Mr. Poliquin or Mr. Shepard, do you have any further comments on this issue?
I would just note that the approach that Ms. Jeffrey articulated in terms of research security is of our labs is also undertaken at Health Canada in our labs, albeit at which have different function and different biosecurity levels, and indeed across the government, consistent with the policies that Minister Champagne and most recently Minister Holland have articulated in terms of research security.
To you, Ms. Jeffrey, you talked about security clearances being reviewed on a regular basis. Can you talk about what the current policy is?
The current security screening process for security clearances at the secret level requires review every 10 years unless incidents arise that require a review for cause of that clearance, as was the case in this situation.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, can you tell us before this incident, when were these security clearances for, just for Dr. Chu, when was it last reviewed before this incident?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information at hand.
Could you please provide that to the committee, please?
Yes.
Thank you for that. Are there any health scientists of any nationality currently working for the Government of Canada who have participated in one of the over 200 PRC talent recruitment programs?
I'm not able to comment on that. I can comment about the processes at the Public Health Agency, where we require conflict of interest and affiliation declarations from all of our scientists, indeed from all of our personnel. And I can say that participation in talent programs of foreign countries, if declared, would be a significant conflict of interest and would not be accepted.
Thank you for that. And through you, Chair, can you tell the committee, to the best of your knowledge, are there any employees working at labs in Canada now who are members of talent programs?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm unable to comment on labs across the country. I can only comment on the declared affiliations and conflicts of interest of the staff at the Public Health Agency, as I previously mentioned.
Yes, so how many scientists would fall into that?
Monsieur le Président.
Point of order. As I mentioned earlier, Ms. Jeffrey is trailing off. Her voice is trailing off, and I can't hear the end of her questions, of her answers, rather.
Do you need the preceding answer to be repeated, Mr. Villemer?
Oui, s'il vous plaît.
Yes, please.
What I can say is, first of all, I'm the deputy head of the Public Health Agency of Canada. I'm not in a position to comment on the participation of scientists across the country. I can comment on the work of the personnel that belong to the Public Health Agency. I can say that they're required to submit declarations of affiliations for research and also conflict of interest. If they were, those types of talent programs would be required to be declared. If they were declared, they would constitute a conflict of interest and would not be allowed, given the nature of their work. And in the case that's at issue today, the scientists hid and, in fact, lied about those affiliations. And when they were discovered, those scientists were terminated because of that.
Dr. Lucas, what we heard from Ms. Jeffrey just now is that there would be no scientists known to be participating in any talent programs that the Government of Canada would be aware of. Is that your indication as well, sir?
Mr. Chair, similar to the response of Madame Jeffrey, I can speak to Health Canada and the regulatory scientists in Health Canada who perform product reviews in context of the Food and Drug Act and other statutes are subject to the same requirements in terms of declarations of conflict of interest and affiliations. And on the basis of those, to our knowledge, there are no affiliations or conflicts of concern, including talent programs.
Thank you very much. No, thank you for that, Dr. Lucas. Through you, Chair, I'll ask the same question to Ms. Hudgens. Are you aware of any scientists with declared affiliations with talent programs who are currently working for the Government of Canada?
Thank you for the question. The answer to that question is similar to that of Ms. Jeffrey and Dr. Lucas. I have no knowledge of that and am unable to make that blanket assertion.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Ms. Jeffrey, we now know that the Dr. Chu's computer was mirrored in about February of 2019. Yet, in spite of all that, shipments of Ebola and Henipa virus were allowed to continue on March 31st, 2019. Do you think that's appropriate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned, there was extensive international collaboration in responding to the Ebola outbreak that took place in West Africa from 2014 to 2016. The work that the National Microbiology Lab and indeed the life's work of Dr. Chu was in therapeutics to respond to Ebola. The collaboration that was taking place was authorized and was fully approved through the procedures that were in place.
Thanks, Ms. Jeffrey. Through you, Chair, if I might interrupt you, I apologize for that, but I didn't ask you if they were approved. I asked you, do you think it's appropriate given what you now know?
I think that international collaboration on therapeutics for pathogens and toxins continues to be very important to the development of the science. I would say that obviously in hindsight, given the activities of these scientists, which emerged much later in that timeline, and evidence of those activities, we would obviously look at decisions that were taken around their work sooner, but the work of collaboration on Ebola continued to be an international priority. And indeed, many countries, Canada included, the United States, but also including China, were active in Western Africa, responding on the ground to the Ebola outbreak. And it was in that vein that the collaboration was approved and the work authorized.
On the one hand, we had the director of CSIS at this committee earlier, and he said, in his view, that PHAC acted expeditiously. That's a good thing. I do want to pick up, though, on my colleague's questioning just now. So I understand the rationale for the shipment of Ebola to the Wuhan Institute of Virology at the end of March in 2019. It's my understanding when I looked through the email chains, it was Dr. Chu that instigated that transfer, yes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, Dr. Chu has been a longstanding, at that point, and internationally recognized scientist who had led the development of the Ebola monoclonal antibodies, which were trialed.
I understand it, but she was the instigator of the transfer, yes or no?
Dr. Chu was the primary interlocutor with WIV.
In their investigative findings, they say, and related to the patent, the undisclosed patent by Dr. Chu, they say it's highly improbable that she did not know. They go on to note there's a collaboration with a number of individuals, including at the Chinese Academy of Military Medical Sciences, for which there may not be a letter of support and further investigations required. At that point, there's an investigation underway specifically related to Dr. Chu. How is it that PHAC officials, I've seen the email chains, there are other PHAC officials that are obviously doing the approvals here, no red flags? I'll stay with Mr. Poliquin. You seem to know more. Like, no red flags here? Why no red flags? How could there possibly not be red flags?
So as Ms. Jeffrey had highlighted, China had been very active in the 2014-2016 West Africa Ebola outbreak.
I don't mean about China. I mean about Dr. Chu. Dr. Chu's under investigation. There's a report related to Dr. Chu, March 23rd. She's the instigating force behind this transfer. How are there not red flags at that point?
So, Mr. Chair, the investigation was, as has been previously highlighted, these were allegations, and further investigation was ongoing.
Well, except that the report does say it's highly improbable that she did not know about the patent. So further investigation is warranted, but they're already casting aspersions on the authenticity of her answers at that point. I don't know. Like, I'll be honest. Like, on the chain of events, a major overblown commentary from conservatives. We got CSIS director coming here saying no expeditious action, but I do look at the email chains here on approvals, and look, PHAC was aware of this too. I see an email from Alan Lau on April 3rd saying we didn't do anything wrong, ... just that because of the nature of the pathogens and where it was going, they, the higher ups in PHAC, wanted to know if we did our due diligence. But it strikes me if full due diligence had been done, specifically in relation to Dr. Chu, that transfer does not occur at the end of March. Is that fair to say?
So the investigations were ongoing at that time, and the procedures were ongoing.
Madam Jeffrey, you mentioned several times that international collaboration in research between level 4 labs in the area of human pathogens and viruses is important. So my question is asked in that context. The named research organizations list that public safety has put out, developed by public safety, does not include the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That list, though, does state that institutions that are not on the list may still pose a risk, and that different entities within the Government of Canada are to take that risk and assess it, even though institutions like the Wuhan Institute of Virology may not be on the list. And so my question is, the Minister of Health had, I think, previously said that there was collaboration going on between entities in the PRC and the National Microbiology Laboratory, and then later said that there wasn't any collaboration going on. So my simple question is, can you confirm that there is no ongoing collaboration, either in terms of transfers of information or materials, between the lab in Winnipeg and any entities in the People's Republic of China, including the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I can confirm that there are no, since this collaboration that we've been speaking of today was ended, there is no collaboration with the government of China or institutes in China on issues related to the lab or any others. Minister Holland was referring to the fact that we continue to participate in UN and other multilateral bodies where it's possible that there could be representatives of the government of China present, but there is no bilateral cooperation or collaboration agreements now.
Okay,
Mr.
thank
Chong,
you.
I'm going to just stop the clock. Mr. Villamur lost connection, and we're just getting him back on, so
Sure.
we'll just suspend for a moment. Mr. Chong, you have 2 minutes, 42 seconds.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for the Deputy Minister of Health. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we're trying to understand why it took 10 months for the lab to be secured. And so my question is, when did the Deputy Minister of Health first become aware of the issues in the Winnipeg lab? Was it in 2018 or 2019?
Mr. Chair, I assumed my role at Health Canada at the beginning of September 2019. I don't have specific information pertaining to my predecessor being informed, but I would assume he would have been informed at key junctures by the president of the Public Health Agency at that time.
Could you get back to the committee with that information? Because it's material.
Yes.
Thank you. Madam Jeffrey, you mentioned several times in your opening remarks and otherwise that you refer to processes that have been put in place that are broad-based, not related to any specific individuals, that your security posture and policies have been strengthened and adapted, and that specific personnel security measures have been updated. Could you tell us a little bit about what exactly those processes, those policies, those postures, those measures are?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I'm happy to speak specifically about some of the policies. For obvious reasons, the details of operational physical security measures we won't speak to. But I would point to, for example, the review of all collaboration agreements by a science security committee in addition to the investigators and the lab management. I would point to enhanced compliance monitoring from our security branch, as well as via partnerships with our security and law enforcement agencies. I would point to the mandatory requirement for not just conflict of interest, but affiliation declarations, and the access control systems, the new student policies that require appropriate clearances. And
Time
have
has
any of these-
expired, Mr. Chong. Sorry.
Okay.
There will be further opportunities, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madame Jeffrey, have any of the processes, posture, policies, or measures recently implemented triggered any review of security clearances in PHAC other than the standard review every 10 years?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, as the committee is aware, there is an ongoing RCMP investigation, and I'd have to refer the committee to my colleagues at Public Safety and the RCMP in terms of their investigations and any work that's underway there.
That's Dr. Chu and Dr. Chang.
I'm not aware of the details of their investigations, so I will have to refer you to Public Safety.
Thank you. Are PRC citizens who are not Canadian citizens nor citizens of formerly allied countries allowed to be granted secret security clearances?
The policy on security clearances is set by the Treasury Board Secretariat, and it is irrespective of nationality.
Thank you for that. Paragraph 31 of the June 30th, 2020 CSIS assessment and Dr. Chu states that an individual...
Mr. Villemer, you're back with us, are you?
Oui, monsieur.
All right.
Yes.
What we're going to do is we're going to give you 5 minutes because you've missed 2 of your 2.5-minute segments. We have Mr. Cooper now, we have Mr. Erskine Smith, and then we'll go to you for 5 minutes, okay?
Merci beaucoup, c'est très apprécié.
All right.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Michael's 3.5 minutes.
Ms. Jeffrey, through you, Mr. Chair, paragraph 31 of the June 30th, 2020 CSIS assessment and Dr. Chu states that an individual identified as restricted visitor number 1 had access to the Winnipeg lab. This individual was an employee of the People's Liberation Army-controlled Beijing Institute of Biotechnology, whose mentor was a Major General identified as Beijing's chief biological defense expert engaged in research relating to biodefense and bioterrorism. Did this individual have a secret security clearance?
I'm going to refer to Dr. Polican about the processes for restricted visitors at the lab.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
It's yes or no.
In terms of access to the laboratory, restricted visitors were a special category of individuals that were under escort at all times, but would not have had access to high containment laboratories.
So who authorized this Beijing military scientist access to the lab?
I would say that the policy on visitors restricted their access to areas in line with the clearances that they had, and so there would have been no access of visitors to restricted level 3.
That's not my question. They had access to the lab. They were in the lab. They might not have been in the level 4 part of the lab, and I'm asking you, Ms. Jeffrey, or whoever may answer, who authorized that access to a Beijing military scientist whose mentor was Beijing's foremost expert in bioterrorism?
I'll first say that that when we use the term National Microbiology Lab, we're referring to a complex of buildings that has both secure and public facilities. I'll turn to our Chief Security Officer to talk about the policy.
I want to know who authorized that individual.
We will return to the committee with that information. I don't have it at hand.
Paragraph 54 of the same CSIS assessment states that Dr. Chu gave access to the lab to at least 2 individuals who were employed with PRC institutions whose work is not aligned with Canadian interests. Did Dr. Chu on her own have the authority to grant access to those individuals? And if not, who did?
I'll refer to Dr. Pelican for the procedures at the lab.
Yes, prior to access to the laboratory, so at the time, an individual would have been able to fill out a facility access request form for a particular individual, and those are submitted to the security division for review to provide access. But as previously stated, access to the laboratory does not give full access to all parts of the laboratory. There are strict.
I understand that, and I thank you for that clarification. I presume that would also apply to the Beijing military scientist who was a restricted visitor. Would CSIS intelligence assessments or reviews been undertaken before those individuals would have been granted access to the lab?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll turn to our Chief Security Officer to talk about the procedures.
Thank you for the question. The individuals attending the lab would be attending as temporary visitors under the policy at the time, which required them to be escorted if they were in the lab. They were granted access because they were not going to be in any part of the lab that was secure or required a clearance.
There's a big difference between marching someone out, escorting someone out via the RCMP, and curtailing one's authority while an investigation is ongoing. And when someone is under investigation with serious allegations that have potentially national security consequences, due process, of course, is justified, but in the interest of security, our national security, surely we should be looking at curtailing individual authority. And so when we look at lessons learned here to ensure this does not happen again, are you looking at the processes by which one might curtail someone's authority while an investigation is ongoing?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say that our security processes and procedures have been enhanced across the board, and we have in place additional policies around security clearances, around access controls, around the types of visitors and students that are able to access the lab that are much more stringent than there were at the time, which would provide.
So knowing that, and apologies for cutting you off, but knowing that, if the policies that you've now put in place had been in place and these allegations have been made, there's an investigation ongoing, you have the initial preliminary report from Presidia, and then the transfer happens at the end of March, would the transfer have happened at the end of March, knowing what we knew as of the end of March with the current policies now in place?
I can say it's a hypothetical question, Mr. Chair, because the collaboration.
Well, it's not, because we have we have the evidence as of that date at March, and we have new policies. We apply current policies to a fact pattern that is existing. It's not hypothetical, it's an existing fact pattern. So would that transfer have occurred at the end of March 2019 if the current policies had been in place?
What I would say is under the current policies, there would have been 2 additional layers of review for that collaboration, which was in fact approved in November of 2018, although the shipment took place later. So the collaboration was approved much earlier in line with the policies at the time. The difference now is that it would be approved by 2 additional layers of review.
Okay, well, if the answer isn't no, it doesn't necessarily stop the transfer. You might want to still revisit those policies, because the answer is, of course, it should have stopped that transfer. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. To you, Dr. Pelican, around the transfer of Ebola and Henipa virus, would you say that the national security was lax and that science took precedent over national security?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think at the time there was a longstanding effort, I would say, on the part, as demonstrated in West Africa by China deploying over 100 health personnel, as an example, to help combat.
Dr. Polican, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I didn't ask for a lecture on Ebola. I've had those before. My question today is national security was lax and science was chosen over national security. Is that not true, sir?
So, Mr. Chair, in this context, the aim of this was to reinforce public health security through the development of medical countermeasures was the stated purpose of the collaboration. And as such, the transfer was authorized.
Thanks very much, Dr. Polican. That being said, we knew that these scientists were under investigation for perhaps 9 months before the transfer occurred. If the transfer did not occur, what would the harm have been?
Well, Mr. Chair, the efforts underway were for the development of medical countermeasures. So, should several potential candidates for the treatment of Ebola as well as Henipa have been published since then. It is difficult to ascertain what could have happened, but certainly innovations that have been published in the public domain would likely not have occurred.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair, before Dr. Chu's collaboration with the PRC and the Wuhan Institute of Virology, was the Wuhan Institute of Virology a level 4 lab? Simply yes or no.
I'll turn to Dr. Polican on that.
Are you asking whether
was the Wuhan Institute a level 4 lab before Dr. Chu's collaboration?
As far as I understand, the WIV was developed as a level 4 facility.
That was not my question, sir. Did Dr. Chu's involvement help the lab get developed, which is now a long-standing level 4 lab?
Mr. Chair, I cannot speak to whether Dr. Chu's involvement was essential to that process.
Thank you for that. Through you, Chair, Dr. Polican, do you know, did the Government of Canada have an MOU with the PRC or the WIV, the Wuhan Institute, to help its development into a level 4 lab?
I'm not aware of such a MOU, should it exist.
Through you, Chair, Dr. Lucas, do you know of any MOU that may or may not exist?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of any.
And Ms. Jeffrey, through you, Chair, same question.
There was no MOU to establish a level 4 lab. There was in 2007 a science and technical cooperation agreement with China to boost collaborative research and development in the life sciences, including for vaccines. That's the only cooperation agreement of which I'm aware.
Thank you very much. We talked a little bit about the affiliated talent programs and scientists having affiliation with them, Ms. Jeffrey. Would you have Canadians believe that these are the only 2 scientists with undeclared affiliation to talent programs with foreign governments?
I can't comment on what undeclared collaborations would be there. I can say that at the agency we have a policy requiring affiliations and a conflict of interest. No such affiliations have been declared, and if they were declared, they would not be accepted.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair, to Dr. Polican, we've heard previously, of course, that Ebola and Henipa were shipped on a flight. I believe it was Air Canada. I might have that incorrect, the exact carrier, and a commercial carrier. Is that a normal procedure? Now, unlike our friend from the NDP, of course, it was not carried on board. We realize that. But is that a usual procedure?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the transfer of level 4 pathogens falls under the transport of dangerous goods regulations, which involves the development of an emergency research response action plan, as well as a number of additional checks. But the ultimate carrier for these types of samples is often commercial.
I need one quick question, and this is a very broad-based question, if you don't mind. I mean, the basics of any human-to-human transaction or relationship is usually based on the presumption of honesty, that the person you're dealing with is honest. With this experience that you've had and the necessity to protect such sensitive, materials, etc., and knowledge, has that turned around that we now have a presumption that perhaps somebody is not going to be honest and they have to prove their honesty to us? That's a very broad question, but a brief reflection, if you don't mind, Ms. Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Indeed, the clearance process itself requires individuals to declare many details of their past affiliations, lives, and work. We do verify through our security office and our chief security officer those declarations with comparing for all public servants who have clearances. There are checks done through the RCMP criminally, also through the Canadian Security Intelligence Services to verify, as well as through open and other source public information. Where individuals seek to hide clandestinely other aspects of their intentions, it's very important that we have policies and procedures that are designed to provide sort of tripwires, if you will, to flag areas for further investigation and research, and to ensure that there is oversight and additional layers of approval for events if indeed the previous checks and clearances don't reveal some of those covert intentions. And so what we have done is, in fact, put additional layers that allow us to do additional steps, to have additional sets of eyes looking at approvals, and to make sure that there is multiple keys, if you will, to unlock different processes and approvals, collaborations, and affiliations. So for us, it is about trusting, but also about verifying, and our security services help us to do that. And our policies and procedures in the area of security help us to be continually vigilant. And I think that's what's really required here. It requires continual vigilance, and it requires awareness, and it requires individuals to act and to flag things that they see that might not be quite in line with policies. And that's a culture, and that is the culture that we're building at the Public Health Agency through the processes we put in place since these incidents now over 4 or 5 years ago.
Mr. Chong has asked for just a quick comment.
I have a question, Mr. Chair, of you. I wonder if you could instruct the analysts to prepare a briefing note for us on describing how security clearances are granted, and in particular, how security Treasury Board guidelines work with respect to security clearances for PRC nationals who are not Canadian citizens.
Request has been made.
Thank you.
Yes. To be honest with you, I would not just limit that to PRC, given what we've heard from the foreign interference. Certainly, the nature of interference, as alleged with China, the PRC is one thing, but there are other actors, and who knows, right?